Ooh, would you look at that? Stay tuned, guys. Full review coming up. Hi gang, Rob here, and barely here after a 4-day savage battle with a summer cold. On 1 September, channel update, and maybe in a follow-up video I explained to you, my loyal viewers and subscribers, my version of the wisdom in staying away from Chinese-produced knives. What should happen shortly thereafter? I get a PM from a subscriber inquiring about guest blade reviews on the Apostle P channel. And what does he want to send me? CRKT Columbia River Knife and Tool Ripple aluminum handled liner lock version. Country of origin, China. I said, send it on in, Cody. And by the way, if you'd like me to put an edge on it while it's here, I'll do so for you at a severely discounted rate. So a new edge it does have. Before we get into the review, let's see how it cuts. Well, the ability of Chinese 8CR14 MOV knife blade steel to take an edge has never been in dispute. My ability to put an edge on, well, it's getting there. So yeah, it takes a pretty good edge, but let's talk about the knife as it came from the factory and some variations and my general impressions of this knife after carrying it around, using it a little bit, sharpening it, adjusting it, evaluating its mechanics and its construction. This review might surprise you just a bit. We'll see. Let's get into some specs really quickly and a little bit of a broad picture of the series. First of all, this version, as I said, is the aluminum handled liner lock version of the Ripple, and it is the original or larger size in this construction. It has a 3 1/8 inch, very graceful drop point blade. Handle length 4 3/8 inches. Overall length, do the math, guys, 7.5 inches. Weight listed by the manufacturer at 2.5 ounces by my scale. In several measurements, 2.7 ounces. Blade steel is, as mentioned, Chinese 8CR14 MOV. And once again, although most would say it is analogous to Japanese Aus 8, I find it in sharpening to perform not quite that well. Takes at least as keen an edge as Aus 8, but material removal is far easier. So I would say that it's not quite as wear resistant and probably won't hold an edge quite as well as Aus 8. Don't know which aluminum alloy the handle's made of. I didn't really research this too strenuously, but I didn't see it listed in any of the for sale listings I perused. Probably 6000 series aluminum. Pocket clip. Stainless steel. A bit of a high profile clip, wouldn't you say? Not so much at the end, but in the middle. It is stainless steel, and it is right hand only, tip down only. Not my preferred positioning. If I were a right-hander, though, I'm going to extract like this. I guess for a flipper, tip down's not so horrible, but I still think I would prefer tip up. Yeah, I would. Deployment is via flipper and only via flipper. You can't extract that blade any other way. There is no thumb stud. The detent is so strong that you can't pull it out. Sans nail nick. That's not really a bad thing. It just is what it is. The pivot rides on IKBS bearing system. That means free floating bearings that ride in channels in the blade and the frame. Not the plastic washer caged type like Kershaw KVT or Spyderco's new ball bearing pivot. Beware, guys, if you take this knife apart, make sure you know where your bearings are, because they're going to want to go everywhere. Variations of this knife. This is kind of important and very interesting, I think. In this same construction, Chinese steel aluminum handle liner lock. They also make a 2 3/4 inch bladed version. Both that shorter one and this original size 3 1/8 inch blade version are going to run you around $35. They also make this knife, I guess in its more original form, as a stainless steel frame lock with a 3 1/8 inch blade of Japanese Akuto 440 stainless steel. I think it to be sort of an improved 440C. That knife produced in Taiwan, not in China. Expect to pay 2.5 times the freight. This one will cost you $80 to $100 for the all stainless frame lock Taiwanese produced version of the Ripple. Which presents an interesting question, doesn't it? Well, it will, as I sort of get into the knife and characterize it as my eyes and hands perceive it. I'll save the question for later. Okay, let's get into the knife. How about the blade shape? It's a beautiful, elegant, hollow ground drop point. Superb EDC blade shape. Very attractive satin finish, if you can stomach the dominant Ken Onion laser etched logo. I think it's a little ostentatious for a knife of this class and style, but it's there. Look at the spine. Beautifully crowned and polished. I mean, guys, this is pretty elegantly finished little knife for a Chinese blade, I got to say. But before we leave the blade, there's a couple issues I have with it that are a little bothersome. Now, I say bothersome, but let's keep in mind the whole time we're doing this review, we're talking about a $30 to $35 knife. It is hollow ground. It is an elegant drop point, fairly delicate and thin at the tip. However, the hollow grind is fairly thick, and to illustrate that, let me do a little fingerprint wipe real quick. I sharpen this blade at my relatively standard these days edge bevels of 15 degree secondary bevel per side and 20 degree micro bevel per side. And to me, that came out a little broad for what should be a thinly ground, hollow ground gentleman's folder. It's pretty thick behind the edge. Probably on the order of 25 thousandths. That may just be a function of the steel and probably the anticipated market for this knife. It's not a knife that's going to be purchased by, let's say, experienced knife handlers. So you got a pretty soft steel, and most of the people who buy this are generally going to use it for a beater knife, I would guess. And so as not to be too fragile, I think CRKT made the decision to grind it a little on the thick side. And it does thicken considerably at the tip, as you can see by the breadth of my edge grind. So I thinned it out a little bit for Cody. And it is a vicious slicer, as you saw at the beginning. Here's my other issue with this knife, and I'm not gonna... It's not just this knife, guys. It's many, many, many knives. I'm gonna point some things out here. A current design trend that is just bothersome to me, and I'm going to use the trusty Benchmade 940 as a pointer. Look at the back of the hollow grind. The plunge grind, where it goes from full stock thickness into its grind thickness, and where the grind rises to. See this big curve? And if you look at the radius as the light reflects of that plunge grind, it's a popular style these days. You see it on many Kershaws, very Hinderer influenced. Basically, before this hollow grind gets to its minimum thickness or its operating thickness, you're this far into it, where my thumbnail is. That presents all kinds of problems when you go to sharpen. If you notice, and I didn't really change this. This is the way the edge bevel looked from the factory. You can see how what appears to be edge bevel kind of follows that plunge grind radius. If I didn't follow it, it would have been twice as broad by the time it got to the back. What looks like edge bevel doesn't really become edge. Let's see if I can get this to reflect correctly for you. It doesn't really become edge until a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch into what looks like the edge. So your cutting edge really starts about there. That just bugs the heck out of me. It bugs the heck out of me because if it looks like cutting edge, it ought to be cutting edge. And if you're an inexperienced sharpener and you try to ride your stone along that edge, your stone is going to dig. It's going to dig as you get out into what should be the flat portion of that blade, and you're going to end up with this big recurve area and big broad edge grind in here, and your knife is going to look stupid and it's going to be ruined. In order to sharpen this correctly, you actually have to ride that plunge grind down until you're on a level steel, and then you can let your stone act like it's supposed to. It's kind of difficult to do. It's a pain in the rear, frankly, and I don't understand it. Especially when they put in what looks like a sharpening choil. You know, if this notch or sharpening choil is going to be here, it needs to extend to where the edge becomes consistent. You know, some combination of larger sharpening choil, tighter plunge grind radius. No need for this silly curve right here. Just get the grinding wheel in there and start the edge. Note to CRKT, note to Kershaw, note to almost every knife manufacturer. You know, anyway, don't get me started. Okay. Other than that, really cool little knife blade, especially in a $35 knife. How about the handle? Well, you know, guys, I am not, as you may have guessed over the years, I'm not a huge Ken Onion knife design person. Not a big fan of his organic curves. At least he didn't put a recurve on this blade. I don't get his eye, I guess. And that's not to say he's a bad designer. He is a very successful knife designer, and plenty of people love his stuff. I'm just not one of them. However, that being said, for a small 2.5 ounce gentleman's folder, this handle fits the hand extremely well. I get all 4 fingers on it in a saber grip. Let me put this in my right hand so I get an accurate feel for the clip. In the hammer grip, I do feel the clip. It could become a hot spot, but this knife's never going to be a heavy cutter. In a pull stroke grip, it's pretty comfortable. I really don't feel the clip much. A little bit on my middle finger. And how about the reverse grip? Well, the clip's not going to be an issue. Knife is not uncomfortable here. Could I conceive of using this knife in a stabbing motion in reverse grip? You bet I could if I had to. Do I have adequate purchase to stab in this grip, in the saber grip? Yeah, I do. I see a pretty functional little EDC blade that could be a backup tactical blade if it had to. How about the fit and finish and construction? Look at the nicely sculpted, polished, shouldered standoffs, which gives you, of course, open construction. Easy to rinse any debris, contamination out of there. How's this lockup look? Well, you got a steel on steel interface. Lockup is riding at about 70%, but I don't think that's particularly a problem. It's probably not going anywhere. You got a hardened steel liner and a hardened steel blade tang. It might move another 5%, never going to be an issue. How is the lockup? Well, good news once again. Now we're riding on bearings. Basically, you can about crank this pivot down tight. You don't feel it really firm up and then you have another half a turn to adjust. It's kind of there or it's not. So you sort of torque it down like a wheel bearing, I guess you could say. If you're an old school mechanic, you know what I'm talking about. I got no side to side. I got no up and down. And let's break it over that ball detent and see how the blade falls. I mean, we're talking smooth, guys. I've got this thing adjusted just a little tighter than it came to me from Cody. It's a pretty light blade. It's not going to fall into the handle like a ZT 0560 with that big, huge blade, but pretty good. And that detent is so strong, it'll almost wear your index finger out if you sit around and flip it all day. But I can tell you this, it's very difficult to employ any flipping motion where you break the detent and the blade does not open to locked. Failing to deploy this knife is really not an issue. I'm trying right now to break the detent without the blade opening all the way. I really can't do it. Guys, this is a $35 flipper that frankly flips better than many $500 flippers. It's pretty good. Frankly, for $30 or $35, it's excellent. It really, really is. I would even say outstanding for $30 or $35. However, I probably would never buy this knife because it's made in China. Which brings me to the next question. Would I buy the Taiwanese produced versions of the Ripple? In black, we have them in blue, we have them in bronze. We have them plain edge like this one, or with the Bevel serrations. I've never handled a CRKT knife with the Bevel serrations. People rave about them. Just from appearances, they seem a little coarse for a small knife like this, but I'm not a serration guy anyway. Those knives run between $80 and $100. I've even seen them for $200 on eBay, and I'm not quite understanding that. I think this knife is an awesome value for 30 or 35 bucks with aluminum handles and a liner lock, but I'm not sure I'm going to pay $80 to $100 for this knife for this blade grind in 440 as a stainless steel frame lock that weighs more. Yes, it's a really slick operating little knife, but you know, for $150, I can have the gold standard in all metal slickly operating EDC blades with a perfect edge grind, a bulletproof lock, S30V steel, and it says Benchmade on it. Made in the good old US of A. You know, is it worth it to me to spend twice as much to have this knife than the all stainless version of this knife? You betcha. That's just me. Your mileage may vary. You know, but you know, I don't know that they're going to sell a lot of those stainless Ripples. I guess there might be enough Ken Onion fans out there. And guys, make no mistake, Taiwanese produced blades are awesome. But I'm not going to be one of those customers. And I think this knife is going to sell really, really, really well. I don't think it's going to sell to knife guys. I think it's going to sell to the casual customer, maybe the gift giver, who think, I want a pocket knife, I don't want to spend more than 40 bucks, and man, that looks cool. And they'd be right, wouldn't they? Most of the customers who are going to buy this don't care where it's made. And let's face it, at this price point, when you walk into your local Walmart, and this one is available at Walmart, can you find anything this cool for 35 bucks? I think not. So that is my review of the CRKT Ripple aluminum version and my rather unorthodox conclusions about the knife. Hope this all is helpful to you. And I hope you're having a great Labor Day weekend. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the Word and Cody's Ripple are sharp.